Oh, hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Inugami Curse by Seishi Yokomizo, translated by Yumiko Yamakaze. Tomo sharpens his claws. The following day, Kindaichi was summoned to the Inugami estate, and as he heard the events of the previous night from Chief Tachibana, his face became very thoughtful. "And what is Kiyo's story, Chief?" "He says that when he heard Tamayo scream and rushed out of the house, he saw somebody heading toward the observation deck. He ran after him but was suddenly punched hard at the foot of those stairs." "I see." "Now, he's totally dejected this morning because they all got to look at his disfigured face to their heart's content while he was unconscious. He might not care that the others saw him, but having been seen by Tamayo must have been quite a blow." "Doesn't anyone know where the man in the military uniform went?" "Not yet, but don't worry. It's such a small town. We'll find out soon for sure." Is there evidence that he sneaked in from outside?" "Oh yes. There are muddy footprints all over Tamayo's sitting room and bedroom. But finding traces outside the building is proving extremely difficult. As you know, it was still raining last night and his footprints have been washed away, so we can't tell where he came in or how he escaped." "Chief, this episode of last night may be very significant. This man, who seems to be a repatriated soldier and insists on hiding his face. Last night's incident has proven without a doubt that he, in fact, exists and is not someone living in this house playing two roles as we had thought." "Yes, I realize that too. But, Mr. Kindaichi, who could this man be? What part is he playing in this case?" Kindaichi shook his head slightly. "I don't know. If I did, I might be able to solve this case. But without a doubt, he must be someone intimately connected with the Inugami Clan. He even gave the Inugami's Tokyo address at the inn. Last night, too, he knew just where to find Tamayo's room." Tachibana looked at Kindaichi's face with a start. "So, that means he knows the layout of the villa quite well." "Exactly. This villa, as you know, has such a strange and complex structure that I, for example, still can't understand how it is arranged, even after visiting several times. If he came with the intent of ransacking Tamayo's room, he must be very familiar with the layout." Tachibana remained in silent contemplation. After a while, though, breathing in deeply and audibly, he declared with determination, as if trying to convince himself, "We'll find all that out when we catch him. Yes, that's the solution, to catch him. There might have been some oversights in the investigation before, because we thought he might be someone in this house playing two roles. But now that we know that's not the case, we'll catch him for sure." Things, however, did not work out quite as the chief had planned. Despite an all-out effort by the police, they could not ascertain where the repatriated soldier had gone. Where he had come from, however, became apparent soon enough. A considerable number of people had seen a man matching the description getting off the train at Upper Nasu on the evening of November 15. That is, the day Take was killed. He had probably come from Tokyo, since that was where the train originated. Moreover, quite a few witnesses had also seen him trudging along the road from Upper Nasu to Lower Nasu. These facts seem to indicate that it was Upper Nasu, not Lower Nasu, where the man really had business. Lower Nasu had a station of its own, so if that had been his destination, he would have stayed on the train until then. Because he had walked from Upper Nasu to Lower Nasu and stayed at the Kashiwaya Inn, however, there must have been some reason he could not stay in Upper Nasu. Several people also saw the man after he had left the inn, and since as many as 3 of them swore to seeing him in the mountains behind the town, the police searched there too, but again came up empty-handed. Probably after leaving the Kashiwaya Inn, the man had hidden himself all that day in the mountains and had returned to the Inugami villa after nightfall. There he had rummaged through Tamayo's room, rendered Kyo unconscious, and escaped. His subsequent whereabouts, however, were a total mystery. Thus, as the police grew increasingly impatient, 5 days passed, then 7, until it was November 25, exactly 10 days after Take was murdered. On that day, a second grisly killing occurred. The one who occasioned this incident was again the lovely Tamayo. By November 25, the mountainous country around Lake Nasu already looked wintry. The peaks of the northern Japan Alps, seen in the distance across the lake, whitened daily, and on some mornings the banks of the lake were covered with a thin layer of ice. Yet, when the weather was fine, the days were sparkling and pleasant, making it probably the most refreshing season of the year. The wind could be a trifle chilly, but the warm sunshine reached the depths of one's soul. That day, Tamayo, yearning for the sunshine, had rowed her boat onto the lake. She was alone, of course, and had not even told Monkey, for ever since the earlier incident with the boat, he had steadfastly refused to let her go out on the lake. Knowing that, she had secretly rowed out anyway, like a child sneaking out of the house to play. Ever since that earlier incident, Tamayo had felt psychologically under siege. Day after day, she was barraged with questions by suspicious policemen, while the members of the Inugami Clan showered her with looks of hatred, malice, and fiery jealousy. She was suffocating. Even less endurable was the marriage offensive launched by Tomo and his family. Although in the past they would not so much as look at her, now they would shamelessly wag their tails, so to speak, and tag along after her. Tamayo shuddered with loathing. Out on the lake, for the first time in a long while, Tamayo felt her soul cleansed. She even thought about abandoning everything, forgetting everything, and rowing farther and farther away forever. The wind was a bit brisk, but the sun was warm and pleasant, and before long she had reached the middle of the lake. She supposed that the smelt fishing season must be over, for she could not see any boats on the lake, just a single commercial fishing vessel in the distance casting nets near Lower Nasu. There was no one else about in the hushed stillness of the afternoon. Tamayo placed the oars inside the boat and lay back, stretching out. It had been a long time since she had looked like this at the sky, so amazingly distant and high, and as she lay there, gazing steadily, she felt herself being drawn up toward the heavens. Tamayo softly closed her eyes. Soon, fleeting tears were moistening her eyelashes. How long she had lain there like that, she did not know. But suddenly, she heard a motorboat engine in the distance. At first, Tamayo paid it no heed, but realizing that the noise was gradually approaching, she sat up and turned around. It was Tomo. "Oh, there you are. I've been looking all over for you. Is anything wrong? Chief Tachibana and that man, Kindaichi, are here, and they want us all together because they have something important to say." "Oh, then I'll head back right away." Tamayo took up the oars in her hands again. "No, the rowboat's too slow," said Tomo, drawing his motorboat nearer. "Get in. The chief seems to be in a big hurry. He says there's not a minute to lose." "But the boat?" "We'll have someone come for it later. Hurry, get in. We mustn't be late, or who knows how angry the chief will be." Neither Tomo's words nor actions were the least bit unnatural, and besides, what he had said seemed quite plausible. Tamayo was deceived in spite of herself. "All right then, I'll do as you say." Tamayo rowed up close to the motorboat. "Put the oars in the boat," said Tomo. "It'd be a bother if they were carried away. Here, I'll hold the boat steady, so climb aboard. Careful." "Yes, I'm fine." Tamayo thought she had transferred her weight onto the motorboat smoothly, but just then one of the boats lurched wildly. "Watch out!" She staggered and fell against Tomo. He held out his arm as if to help her, but at that instant his hand covered her nose with a handkerchief soaked with some sort of liquid. "What are you doing?" Tamayo struggled furiously, but Tomo's arms clasped her tight, and the wet handkerchief was pressed harder and harder against her nose. She felt a sweet, sour smell race from her nose to her brain. "No! No!" Tamayo's resistance grew gradually weaker, and soon she was slumped in a deep sleep in Tomo's arms. Tomo gently lifted her disheveled hair off her face, then lightly kissed her forehead and bared his teeth in a grin, his eyes glowing with desire. Tomo gulped and licked his lips like a hungry beast. Then he laid Tamayo down and hunched over, started up the motorboat, heading in the opposite direction from the Inugami villa. Except for the lone kite that flew overhead in slow, lazy circles, not a soul had noticed what had occurred. The Man in the Shadows. About 4 kilometers from Nasu, on the opposite shore of the lake, is a lonely village called Toyohata. Although it had always been poor, it nevertheless prospered considerably for a while when there was a good demand for cocoons. Now that the export of silk was at an all-time low, however, the whole village seemed devoid of life. Of course, it was not just Toyohata village that was affected in this way. The entire region around Lake Nasu now faced this agonizing fate. At the western edge of the village flowed a stream, and where it emptied into the lake, the earth and sand it deposited formed a delta that grew larger year by year, encroaching upon the lake. The delta was covered with dead reeds that swayed desolately in the wind. It was among these reeds and into the mouth of the stream that Tomo's motorboat now glided. He slowed down and with his darting eyes quickly took in the scene around him. But all he saw were the dead reeds waving forlornly. Not a soul was in the rice paddies or mulberry fields, now that the harvest was over. Only the same lone kite, drawing rings in the sky, observed him from above. Chuckling to himself at his luck, Tomo began to maneuver the boat upstream between the reeds, hunched over as if hiding himself from sight. Soon, above the reeds before him, there appeared a European-style building, a structure that was pitiably dilapidated now, but that must have been quite grand in its day. Why such a building in such a place? Everyone who first discovers it seems to wonder about this. But there is a good reason for its location. Toyohata village was where the Inugami Clan got its start, and this building, now visible among the reeds, was where Sahe first made his home. Because of the village's inconvenience, however, Sahe eventually moved his business headquarters to Upper Nasu. He also built a new villa there. Since that time, this house in Toyohata village had not been occupied and was preserved only as a kind of family monument. With the war, however, less and less effort could be devoted to its upkeep, and when its caretaker was drafted, there was nothing else to do but let it go to ruin. Now, after Sahe's death, there remained no one with any affection for the old house, and it had been left to grow increasingly dilapidated. The villagers had taken to saying it was haunted. It was toward this house that Tomo now seemed to be heading. No doubt in the old days, this building had looked out directly onto the lake. Now, however, the ever-growing delta separated it far from the water's edge, and it stood alone, as if forgotten, among the desolate reed beds. Tomo navigated the boat up the stream and rammed it into a reed bed by the house. This far in, the water was shallow and the mud deep, so maneuvering was not easy. Finally, though, he managed to moor the motorboat between the thick clumps of reeds and leap out, causing several alarmed birds to flap and fly out from the base of the reeds. Damn! What the? Frightened, Tomo swore in vexation. He could not leave the boat where it might be seen, so he pulled on the mooring line, drawing the boat closer, and soon he managed to hide it among the clumps of reeds. Relaxing at last, he wiped the sweat from his brow and looked on Tamayo's face as she lay unconscious on the bottom of the boat. Tomo felt a thrill run through his body. How beautiful she was, lying, sleeping so innocently. Traces of a short-lived struggle as she was being overcome by the drug still remained in her disheveled hair and knitted eyebrows. But even that did not detract from her beauty. Sunshine filtering through the reeds made golden spots of light dance on her cheeks, moist with perspiration. Her breathing was a bit rapid. Tomo gulped in anticipation, then glanced quickly around, as if someone was looking over his shoulder at this delectable treat. He remained thus for some time, crouched on the reed bed, gazing at Tamayo's sleeping figure in the boat. For one thing, it was a sight he could never tire of watching, and for another, he still seemed to be having trouble making up his mind. Huddled among the reeds, Tomo continued biting his nails and watching Tamayo's sleeping face. He was like a child who had started a bit of mischief, but who could not decide if he should carry it through to the end. The exquisite beauty of his target was unnerving him all the more. Oh, the hell with it! What does it matter? I'm going to have her sooner or later anyway. Muttering to himself, Tomo quickly extended his arms and lifted Tamayo. The motorboat lurched violently, and loaches splashed in the mud among the reeds. The weight and warmth of Tamayo's body in his arms, her virginal fragrance like fresh picked fruit, the pulsing of the blood beneath her silken skin. Tomo already felt overcome with excitement. Nostrils flaring and eyes bloodshot, he proceeded through the reeds, carrying Tamayo. He was perspiring profusely, sweat pouring down his cheeks, even though the November air was biting cold. Beyond the reed beds were the remains of a wooden fence, originally painted white, but now lying mostly broken, rotted, and covered with mud and dirt. The sight inside the fence, too, was depressing, for the entire grounds were buried under dead leaves. Hastening past the fence, with Tamayo in his arms, Tomo then stepped slowly through the dead leaves, edging closer and closer to the empty house. Like a fox with its prey in its jaws. He did not want to be seen, could not afford to be seen, and had to watch the lake and the land constantly for any movements. Suddenly, Tomo caught his breath and bent low among the reeds. For a time he remained thus with Tamayo in his arms, as immobile as a rock, observing silently. He had been overcome by a powerful sensation. Somewhere, someone was watching him. A minute, 2 minutes, Tomo's heart was pounding wildly. Sticky, oily sweat oozed out onto his brow. But nothing happened. Everything was as hushed as ever, and the only sound he heard was the rustle of the reeds in the wind. Tomo lifted his face from between the reeds and looked at one of the windows of the house ahead. He was sure he had sensed something move in that window. There was a gust of wind, and as if in responding welcome, sooty curtains fluttered inside the paneless window. More miserably torn than any rag, they whipped the window frame with every breeze. No one had bothered to steal them. They were so tattered, and they remained untouched in this abandoned house. Seeing the fluttering curtains, Tomo clicked his tongue in irritation and lifted Tamayo's body again. Then, checking around, he leaped out from among the reeds with animal swiftness and dashed from the veranda into the living room of the old house. The smell of mold stung his nose. Spider webs hung from the walls and ceiling like festive ornaments. Because the lake was home to countless flying insects, spiders had cast their webs everywhere in anticipation of a good catch. And the instant that Tomo had rushed in, all the captive creatures still alive started beating their wings in unison, causing the fringes of the hanging webs to shake violently, as if in a storm. He was hit by a pungent odor that made him think of rotting flesh, of rotting fish. Averting his face, Tomo looked at the entrance hall and began climbing the stairs, when he saw something that stopped him cold. Someone must have climbed these stairs recently, for there in front of him was a muddy footprint. Tomo stared hard at the footprint with bated breath, as if it was something terrifying. Soon, however, realizing that in fact there were other fresh footprints of several different types all over the entrance and stairs, he relaxed and sighed deeply. He remembered that the police had searched this empty house looking for the repatriated soldier. These, then, must belong to them. Relieved, Tomo began climbing the stairs, endeavoring to make as little noise as possible, for stumbling even slightly produced a sound that echoed throughout the house and made his blood run cold. The second floor looked as sorry as the first. Every pane of glass was broken, and hardly any of the door hinges remained. Tomo must have cased the house beforehand, for he went straight to one of the doors, kicked it open, and entered the room carrying Tamayo. It was a dreary, empty room devoid of all ornament, with only a steel-framed bed and a sturdy-looking chair in one corner. The bed had a straw mattress whose stuffing was coming out, but of course there were no sheets or blankets. The entire room was a picture of desolation and ruin. Tomo gently placed Tamayo's body on the top of the straw mattress, wiping off the sweat that poured down his face. He continued to glance around. Everything was going smoothly. No one knew he had brought Tamayo to this abandoned house. It would all be decided here and now, and when it was over, everything would proceed as he had planned, no matter how Tamayo cried or wailed. Then the woman, the money, and the power would all be his. Tomo trembled with excitement, like a warrior going into battle, his mouth dry and his knees shaking. He removed his necktie with quivering hands, tore off his jacket and shirt, and threw them on the chair. The brightness of the room made him uncomfortable, but unfortunately, there was no shutter or curtain to cover the window. Biting his nails, Tomo looked around the room for a while, trying to come up with a plan, but soon he muttered, "Hell, what does it matter? Nobody's looking. Besides, the lady herself is sleeping soundly." Stooping over the bed, Tomo began removing Tamayo's clothes, piece by piece, as the gentle slope of her shoulders and the curves of her ample breasts revealed themselves to him. Tomo could no longer control his excitement. His fingers shook as if in fever, and his breath came in rapid gusts. Just then he heard it, a single, faint knocking sound followed by the creak of a floorboard. Tomo leaped away from the bed like a locust and braced himself, watching and listening, lying in wait for the attacking enemy. But he did not hear another sound. Tomo, however, was still worried and decided to investigate. There was nothing amiss, just a nest in the corner of the kitchen full of newborn baby rats. So that's all it was, squealing rats, he thought to himself, clicking his tongue in disgust. and climbing back up the stairs. Tomo began to open the door to the room. Suddenly, he caught his breath. When he had walked out of this room a minute ago, he had left the door open. How could it be that it was now shut? Had it shut by himself? Had it shut by itself, perhaps blown by the wind? Placing his hand on the doorknob, Tomo opened the door cautiously. The room seemed unchanged. Relaxing, he walked up to the bed when suddenly he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Someone had placed Tamayo's jacket over her bare breasts. Tomo could not move. It seemed as if the soles of his shoes were stuck to the floor. He was not a daring man to begin with. In fact, he was exceedingly cowardly. Today's undertaking, therefore, had required tremendous determination on his part, and he had been continually jumpy, even after setting his plan into motion. Tomo was drenched with sweat, his mouth parched, and the depths of his throat burning. He wanted to say something, but his tongue seemed tied in knots, and all he could finally manage was, Who's there? Then, as if in reply, he heard the floorboard creak on the other side of the door to the adjoining room. Yes, there was someone in the other room. Why hadn't he checked it out before? The eyes that had been watching him from the window had not been a product of his imagination. Whoever it was had been hiding in this house, in the very next room. Why hadn't he checked it out earlier? Who is it? Come out! Who's hiding there? Immediately, the door started opening. Slowly, little by little. Then, Tomo saw the figure of the man standing there. A man who appeared to be a repatriated soldier, with a field cap pulled low over his brow and his face hidden with a muffler. About an hour later, Monkey received a strange phone call at the Inugami villa. Hello, is this Monkey? I want to make sure I'm speaking to Monkey. Me? It doesn't matter who I am. I just want to let you know about Miss Tamayo. You'll find her in the abandoned house in Toyohata village. You know, the one the Inugamis used to live in a long time ago. Go up the stairs and into the room immediately to the left. Please go for her right away. Don't sound an alarm though, because it would be embarrassing for her if people found out about it. So it would be best if you did everything alone. Oh, and you'll probably find her still sound asleep, but you needn't worry about that. She'll wake up when the effects of the drug wear off. All right? I'm counting on you. Remember, go as quickly as you can. Goodbye.